What's up, everyone, and welcome back to HBCU Game Day. I am Symone, bringing you guys the HBCU NFL Report, where we keep you guys updated on some of your favorite Black college football stars in the pros. As always, I'm joined by Lut, and today was the day where all NFL teams were required to cut their rosters down from 90 to 53. 18 HBCU players made the cut, the initial cut. But that doesn't mean the other guys' seasons are over, as they can still be signed to practice squads and activated to active rosters as the season goes on. Lut, what a Tuesday.
Exactly, Symone. Really a critical day, obviously, for all of the kids trying to make NFL rosters. And we went into the day with 30 HBCU players on NFL rosters. And after 12 were cut, as you said, we're down to 18. And as you said, a lot of them, I'm sure, are hoping to be picked up. And in most cases, they are told whether they're going to be picked up or not, because they can, during this 24-hour period after this cut down, they can be, there's a 24-hour period where if they are not picked up by another team, they can be signed to the practice squads for the teams that cut them. But many of them may even be picked up by other teams if teams have had their eye on them or something like that. But let me go through this list of the 12 that got cut. There's Shamar Bridges, the rookie out of Fort Valley State. He was cut and waived by the Baltimore Ravens. The Carolina Panthers let go of veteran defensive end Daryl Johnson out of North Carolina A&T. Cleveland had the most HBCU guys to go to not make the 53-man roster. They included Dalen Baldwin, the wide receiver who went to Jackson State and Morgan State before finishing his career at Michigan. Alex Taylor from South Carolina State, an offensive lineman. David Moore, an offensive lineman from Grambling, as well as Roderick Perry, who started his career at South Carolina State and finished it at Illinois. All four of them were waived by Cleveland. The Chicago Bears let go of Lachavious Simmons, who was the only HBCU player. It's kind of an infamous tag that he had. He was the only player, the one player taken in the 2020 NFL draft out of the Tennessee State. He was waived by Chicago. The biggest surprise was that a drafted player, James Houston out of Jackson State, played last year for the Tigers under Deion coach Prime Sanders. He was waived by Detroit. That's the big surprise we'll talk about more. Miami let go of Fayetteville State offensive tackle Keon Smith. Philadelphia released another veteran, McCain, the defensive back out of North Carolina A&T, as well as two other veterans who have been in the league for the last 3 to 5 years. Trenton Cannon, the former all-conference MVP running back out of Virginia State, was let go by Tennessee, and Washington waived cornerback out of Southern, Danny Johnson, had been a kick returner for the Commanders last year. So those are the 12 that, as we said, were cut, but they may be picked up, and probably some of them will be picked up after a 24-hour period.
The biggest surprise, I think, to us two and to everyone is the releasing of James Houston. James Houston was a late-round draft pick, and we talked before the show, late-round draft picks does not guarantee you a 53-man roster spot. No matter where you get picked, you're not guaranteed a roster spot, but it's always surprised when a drafted player doesn't make the roster, especially someone who like James Houston, who was making a lot of plays for the Lions earlier in the offseason. And it seemed like Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Lions, had a lot of great things to say about James Houston. So that cut really surprised me.
Well, anytime a drafted player is cut, even if he's been in the league for 2 or 3 years, if you look on the NFL.com or anywhere else, the first thing that considered surprises is if you're a drafted player who got cut. And it is very rare, very rare. I would even dare say Houston may be the only drafted player that was drafted this year that was released when they cut down to 53. And it's going to be interesting to see if they pick him up. What they're saying on the Detroit website is that he was in a positional transition, so to speak, from a stand-up linebacker inside to being a rush linebacker on the NFL level. And they thought he was not big enough or strong enough to really be able to penetrate, even though he did, as we know, last year had 16 sacks for Jackson State, was second in the nation on the FCS level to Isaiah Land. They said when they gave him the opportunity, they said the way they said it on the Detroit Lions website called Detroit Lions Wire was that him rushing the passer had become problematic. And as you said, Dan Campbell had good things to say about him early, but if you'll notice in the last couple of preseason games, he did not even get a lot of reps. And that probably came from the fact of he was not getting that kind of penetration during practices. So I would say that of the people that were cut, certainly he was the biggest surprise.
And Dan Campbell did have a lot to say about James Houston positively, but another thing I did notice that Dan said about him, I don't know if it was after a preseason game, a practice, or what, but he said the future is bright for James Houston, but they're not exactly sure how they want to use him. And like you said, not knowing if they want to be an inside linebacker, not knowing if he has the size on the NFL level to be an edge rusher. So that probably is the biggest thing with the Lions. You know, you got to have the right defensive coordinator to draw up plays for someone who's such an interesting enigma of a defender like James Houston is.
Well, you know, the same thing was said about Daryl Johnson when he came out of A&T and went to Buffalo. They had a lot of good things to say. Even some of the veterans were talking about how much potential he had. But in the NFL, it's a numbers game. How many people do you have to beat out? How many people do you have to, quote unquote, be better than to earn a spot on an NFL team? Daryl Johnson has struggled since his first year in the league with the Buffalo Bills, where he actually got some time on the playing field. And it's almost like if you prove that you cannot be a regular player, if you cannot get in the regular rotation, you have to make the team based on your special teams play. And when we look at not only Daryl Johnson, but we look at Trenton Cannon, we look at Danny Johnson, all of these were guys who stayed in the league because they could play special teams. They were not every down players and were not even in the rotation for every down. They would sometimes come in spot situations, but they made the teams because of special teams. And, you know, every year that's going to be a battle because other people are coming up that are going to be perhaps more aggressive on special teams. It tells you that you can never be satisfied in the NFL to, you know, think that you have it made unless you're a veteran and unless they're paying you a lot of money. And even some cases when you're doing that, they still will let you go if you don't perform. It's a dog-eat-dog kind of world in the NFL, and that's just the lay of the land.
Let's talk about another young player. We started with James Houston, another young player who's entering his second year in the league, McCain, a cornerback out of North Carolina A&T. He was waived by the Eagles, and I was a little bit surprised that he got waived only because towards the beginning of training camp, well, last season, McCain was going back and forth between the Broncos and the Eagles, but he ended the season last season with the Eagles. He did ride the practice squad for a couple of weeks, but towards the end of the season, he saw himself on the active roster. He got into a few games on special teams, and the thing that jumped out the most to me, you guys know I'm an Eagles fan, so you know, I know these things, but the last game of the season against the Dallas Cowboys, it did get into garbage time early because both teams had clinched a playoff spot. But after the game, the media asked head coach Nick Sirianni, who were some players that jumped out to you in that game, even though it was garbage time? And the first player that he said was McCain, making plays on special teams. And then fast forward to this season, the Eagles were very deep at cornerback, so it was going to be a long shot for McCain. But starting the offseason, McCain was the lead guy on the second unit. He was a starting outside corner on the second unit, and he was really making a showing for himself. But we had another guy that learned quick. He was an undrafted free agent out of Alabama, Josh Joby, and he's the one who really kind of pushed McCain, amongst other guys, out of that 53-man roster.
Which probably means, like you said, that he will probably be picked up, if not by someone else. He'll probably go onto the Eagles practice squad. But, you know, we've talked about the cuts. We probably need to talk about some of the guys who made it, who were the surprise guys that made it. And the two surprises, and they're not surprises based on how they performed. They are surprises because they were undrafted, which probably means that they should have been drafted. And those guys were Deshaun Dixon, the defensive end out of Norfolk State, led the MEAC in sacks last year, didn't get drafted and was probably unheralded, was actually a late addition to the Jacksonville Jaguar squad. But and he's one, and the other guy was Markquese Bell out of Florida A&M, the safety out of FAMU, who really shined last year for FAMU. Everybody thought he was going to be drafted, performed well at the combine as well as his pro days, but didn't get drafted. But he went into Dallas and played well. And interesting, Symone, the two players, the two free agents, undrafted free agents that did make it, Dixon and Markquese Bell, were the players of the week this week in our HBCU NFL report. Bell had an interception, and Dixon led the Jaguars in tackles with 8 tackles. Even though he played only half the snaps in the game, he had 8 tackles, including a sack, as well as another tackle for loss. So, the fact that you jump out and make those kind of splash plays help you when it comes down to this final cut. Now, how long they'll last, whether they can establish themselves in the league remains to be seen. But there are 2 undrafted players, rookie free agents this year, that made the 53-man rosters, as we can say, as of right now.
And I don't know about Dixon, but like you said, a lot of people were upset that Markquese Bell wasn't drafted. And I think the biggest thing was because he took a couple of visits. I don't want to say a lot, but I know he took a couple of visits, had a couple of phone calls with the Dallas Cowboys. So the Dallas Cowboys knew what they were getting in Bell before they signed him as an undrafted free agent. There's always guys that go undrafted and then they're a surprise at camp or a surprise at training camp. But the Cowboys already knew what Markquese Bell could do for the team. So the fact that they didn't draft him and then already signed him, already made him a spot on the 53-man roster goes to show, yeah, Cowboys, y'all knew what y'all were doing by not drafting him and having him come on as an undrafted free agent, trying to save some money there.
Yeah, and the other guys we have to obviously dap are the other 3 guys other than Houston that were drafted that did make rosters, and that's Joshua Williams out of Fayetteville State, who made the 53-man roster for the Kansas City Chiefs. There's Kobe Durant out of South Carolina State, defensive back that was drafted by the LA Rams. And then Jatiah Carter was the offensive lineman out of Southern that made the Chicago Bears. So Houston was certainly a surprise. I don't think the other 3 were surprises because we had seen, in fact, Williams as well as Durant both had excellent outings in this last preseason game. I thought they were safe. I thought that Houston was kind of on the bubble, so to speak. It didn't surprise me that the guys like Cannon, as well as Johnson, as well as both Johnsons, Danny Johnson and Daryl Johnson, were kind of on the bubble because, that special teams, they want wild and crazy guys who are going to run down and bust up wedges and whatnot for punts as well as kickoffs. So it's a tough and difficult thing to make. Danny Johnson really had made the Commanders team as a result of kick returns last year and did a good job. Thought that he would get an opportunity to keep that. And I've always said, I think we talked about this last week, that I've compared both Cannon and Danny Johnson to a guy out of A&T, Maurice Hicks, who stayed in the league 5 years, could never become an every down player, but stayed because of his special teams and returns abilities. So it'll be interesting to see how many of these veterans might get picked up. Somebody who's in need of a kick returner could maybe go with Cannon or with Danny Johnson. It'll be interesting of the veterans that were released. If you want to call McCain a veteran, he's the one I would expect to be picked up because he's proven that he has some cover skills that somebody may covet, and he may end up on a practice squad.
We really need to decide, Lou, what is considered a veteran, because honestly, I do not think a second-year player is a veteran.
I understand that. I certainly understand that. But if you've spent a year in the league, you're a Philadelphia fan. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And Mike Tomlin always talks about the difference in the first year and the second year. Once you've been in the league a while, you've took a turn around the barn, so to speak. The idea that you're a rookie or that you're, going through this for the first time goes away. So in that sense, that's what I refer to anybody who's been in the league 1 year as a vet, especially one who's jumped around like Matt McCain did. You find out really quick that this is a business, that nothing is guaranteed, and that they control exactly how your life will go in terms of your NFL career based on the decisions that they make. So I'd say anybody that's been in the league for 1 year is a veteran.
I'll take it. I'll let you have that one. Well, guys, we had a lot of pleasant surprises, a couple of unpleasant surprises, but like we both said, just because you didn't make the initial 53-man roster doesn't mean that you can't be signed to a practice squad. And also, it doesn't mean that you can't make a 53-man roster later in the season. But guys, I am Symone. He is Lut. We are here with HBCU Game Day for the HBCU NFL Report. Keeping you guys updated on some of your favorite Black college football stars in the pros. Thank you guys so much for joining us.